I'm Dr. Duke with The New American. Really pleased to be joined today by Luis Miguel, a prolific contributor to The New American magazine. Luis, thanks for joining us.
No problem, Doc. It's always a pleasure to be here with you.
You have been really on the ball here, keeping us updated what's going on at the federal level, at the state level, with regards to the election and all of the worries and concerns and evidence we have of voter fraud. I think there's a lot of depressed Americans right now who watch that judges across the country ignore the issue. A lot of depressed Americans who see the 3 Supreme Court justices that Donald Trump appointed under his last 4 years all refuse to pay any attention to this. We've seen state agencies and local state governments deny that there's problems in spite of all the evidence in front of them. So talk to us at this point in time. Well, give us as broad and as complete an outline as you can of where all this stands. Is there any chance yet that the election is overturned or challenged?
Absolutely, Doc. Fantastic question. Look, I'm not going to try to sugarcoat the situation. The fact is that we're at an incredibly dire moment in our nation's history. It's not only a constitutional crisis that we face, it's an existential crisis. If the fraud is not challenged, if it's the results of a fraudulent election are not overturned, I mean, the consequences for our republic are monumental. But it has to be fought. At the same time, not here to be a black pillar, a common term for defeatism. No, on the contrary, we need to keep up hope, because so long as you have hope, you'll keep fighting. And the only way we can keep fighting is if people continue to believe. And the fact is that there are many possibilities still on the table. That's why the president hasn't called it quits yet. He hasn't thrown the towel. Part of that, of course, is who he is. We all know President Trump is a fighter if he's anything. But there are very realistic options still before us. And of course, as many who've been following the story realize, one of the most prominent right now is the one put forth by great leader, great patriot, Representative Mo Brooks out of Alabama. And of course, this is a fully constitutional and legal option. The electors in the Electoral College have made their votes, and those will be arriving to Congress to be counted on the 6th of January. So at that time, because some people are still patriots out there, we have in many of these battleground states that have Republican lawmakers. We have a second slate, the Republican electors, who have sent their votes also to Congress. So there's an opening there in which the Republicans can still make a choice in favor of, just striking down what we know were fraudulent election results that gave Joe Biden a win. Now, it's going to take some courage, and frankly, there's a lot of lawmakers, a lot of people in authority who don't have it. Mo Brooks right now is in Congress. He needs a senator to be able to make this bid successful. And so far, while we have some Republicans in the Senate who haven't said no to this effort, but at least last I checked, there wasn't anyone who stepped up to the plate to take it. So that's where we come in as patriots, as Americans, as the grassroots. It's time for us to be putting the pressure on all of our Republican lawmakers, particularly in this case, on our Republican senators, and especially the people who want to have some semblance of a political future. Make it clear to them that they're going to be retired in the next couple of years if they don't stand up right now for the Republic and for the Constitution. I mean, there's some prominent names out there, people who want to continue being prominent on a national scene and who are conservative. Ted Cruz, Rand Paul are obvious names that come to mind of people we could try to get on our side to join in on Representative Brooks' effort on the Senate side of things. So there's a clear window there. This battle isn't over. Obviously, it's in a dire situation, but we can't give up hope. We can't afford to give up hope at this point.
Let's say that we were able to get a Republican senator to stop being a rhino and step up and back Mo Brooks on this. What would be the next step then? What would it look like if you got that senator working alongside that congressman? What would be the avenue? What would it look like if that were to move forward?
Right. Well, ultimately, what I imagine would end up happening is that you would have a situation in which neither candidate ends up with the 270 electoral votes necessary to become president. And so that would ultimately end up going to a vote for the president in Congress, in which the House of Representatives, every state delegation would have a single vote to be able to cast on behalf of a candidate for the presidency. Now, the situation there obviously looks promising for Republicans. At the same time, you can never become too confident in a lot of these Republicans who are in Congress, because some of them, frankly, are rhinos or are puppets of the establishment who might ultimately kowtow more to their masters in the elites than to the actual people who elected them. But presuming that they do go by what their constituents want, we have a shot there. And of course, in the Senate would ultimately be the deciding ground for the vice presidency, in which every senator has a vote there, and we have the majority of Republicans in the Senate. So again, there is a very real window of possibility. So I'm not trying to sugarcoat things, but it is important that people understand that this battle isn't over. If you come to believe it is over, like the media would love you to believe, then that's when we're finished. We have to keep the fight up, and we can very well win this.
What would you ask Mom and Dad America to do? What would you ask the average citizen to do? What couple of things can they do to try to move this along in the right direction?
Right. I mean, obviously, like I said earlier, call your senators, but even beyond that, you can exert a lot of pressure on people if you know where are the right points, where are the right pressure points to attack. And so, you had, and this is an article that I wrote earlier this morning, actually. Senator McConnell, our majority leader, came out and he's telling senators, Republicans in the Senate, not to join in with Mo Brooks' effort. So, flood McConnell's phone, and not only his, but of all the people in the leadership in the Republican Senate, and talk with your state politicians as well, your state, your local, your county Republican executive committees. See if you can put out a resolution calling on them to do this in the Congress. Your state political leaders, especially if they're Republicans, House speakers, majority minority leaders, et cetera, your governors, if they're amenable. Like in the case of Florida, my state, Governor DeSantis is a huge pro-Trump patriot who's very much supporting the president's bid to stop the steal. So he'd be a great point, especially with his contacts in Washington. So a lot of times, if you can get these people on board, we as ordinary citizens, even though these people in Washington are supposed to be listening to us, frankly, a lot of times they don't, just because they see these masses of people and they have so many influences over there in the Capitol. But a lot of times, if they see this information or these messages coming from people who have influence, from party leaders, etc., then that exerts a lot more influence in their eyes than if it were just coming from us, the regular folks.
Right, and as you've pointed out earlier in the segment, if this battle ultimately is lost, it does cast a pall over the very core of our constitutional republic, the integrity of our vote. To take the last minute or so, if you don't mind, in the segment, to talk about what the consequences are. What does it mean to allow this to move forward with all of these unanswered questions, where I saw a poll recently that said 1 in 3 Democrats believe the election was stolen, which is shocking, right? I mean, these Democrats are glad Biden's the president, but almost 1 out of 3 Democrats actually believe that unfair play is what got their guy elected. That's a staggering number, it seems to me. What are the consequences for elections generally and for, again, a constitutional republic if we have this kind of doubt and distrust for the mechanisms of voting moving forward?
Yeah, fantastic question. I mean, the first thing is that on a political level, we know that a Biden presidency, or what that really means, Kamala Harris presidency, is going to be one of the elites forcing socialist dystopia upon us. On the electoral level, the integrity of our elections, it would be an absolute travesty, devastating, because it would just be a clear signal that whenever they want, they can steal an election. On the moral level, it would totally destroy the faith of so many Americans, faith in the republic, in our institutions, and that could affect people's participation in the long term, and ultimately lead to more fraud, not only on Democrats, but I could foresee any major political party, Republicans or otherwise, ultimately engaging in malfeasance themselves just to try to keep up with it all.
Right. Yeah. Well, there's so many moving wheels here. I know we're going to do a follow-up to this where we talk a little bit about the voter fraud aspect, but these are really serious warnings, Luis, and I want to thank you for your time today. I'm Dr. Duke with The New American, joined again by our old friend, Luis Miguel. Luis, I want to thank you for joining us today. I also want to point out that you are a prolific contributor to The New American magazine, and all of your really great writing is available at thenewamerican.com. I really urge you to go take a look at what Luis has to say. He's incredibly well-spoken in these interviews, but boy, the level of information that he's able to give you in the articles, just please go to thenewamerican.com to read some of those stories. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of those stories right now. So we talked in a previous segment about why it is so important to keep fighting, why this election is not technically even close to being over yet. But I think we should do a little bit of a postmortem here, an autopsy, if you will. Talk about, you've written a lot about this, talk about all the ways in which this election was interfered with. I mean, we've got tech companies who promised before the election that they were going to swing votes to Joe Biden. We have state legislators changing the way we voted for hundreds of years, weeks before the elections. We have these utterly unverifiable, no ID required mail-in ballots just dropped in the post office. We have all sorts of post office complaints, postal workers complaining about hidden ballots. We've got people unloading buckets full of votes in the wee hours of the morning. Give us a synthesis, Miguel, Luis Miguel, give us a synthesis of how all this worked and how many different types of voter fraud may really have been at play here.
Well, absolutely, Doc, and thank you again for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here with you. And you hit the nail right on the head, my friend. Look, this steal of the election was a huge, you could say it was the deep state pulling out all the stops. And what's fascinating about it is if you saw them use every single tool in their arsenal in order to thwart the re-election of President Trump, you saw them use all the major assets at their possession in order to achieve one of the greatest heists in American political history. You have the use of Silicon Valley, big tech, and social media suppressing important information the public needed to be aware of in order to make an informed decision on Election Day. This is what I really want to stress, and of course there's so many aspects to all this, but I mean just the level of corruption with big tech is something that I think is minimized, not by us, but by much of the general public. And it's sad because it really is tragic, because so many people are willing to turn a blind eye to it just because their guy quote unquote won, namely Joe Biden. But if you look at some of the reports, actually, I've written about some of these within the last week or so. But you can see very clearly how at Facebook and Twitter, for example, you go through many of their high-level executives, people who are directors, people who are administrative top roles, and they're donating huge amounts of money, in many cases the maximum amount of legal money possible, to the Biden campaign. And then you compare how many of them were donating to Trump. In the case of Facebook, it was zero. In the case of Twitter, it was minimal. But they're donating huge tens of thousands of dollars to the Biden campaign. And then you go and you see, why you ask yourself, why are they promoting Biden so heavily? And of course, there's the ideological aspect. They agree on Biden's politics. But as always, you got to follow the money. And one of the important components in this, of course, is migration. You see that Biden right now is lining his supposedly incoming administration with Silicon Valley regulars, like one of the former CEOs of Google. And one of the reasons is migration. They want a lot of cheap migration. It's going to save them money. And so they want a lot of the Trump era immigration restrictions, especially on worker visas, to be rescinded, and Biden is promising that he'll do it. The same thing goes for Cuba. There's a lot, they see a huge dollar sign right now in Cuba where they can open up that market, because when Trump came in, he undid a lot of the loosening of Cuba policy that Obama had done. And so they're seeing right now there could be a huge ground for them to invest in infrastructure and everything. And so as a result, they see Biden is promising to normalize relations with Cuba, and they see themselves as making a lot of money in Cuba, another reason why it helps to oust Trump. And so obviously we know the story. We know how they suppressed the Hunter Biden story, the emails, in order to help Biden's candidacy. And then you have other deep state assets that were activated. He had the CIA, and you have Lieutenant Colonel McInerney and others who have detailed that in extreme detail about the CIA servers in Germany. And now you had to have U.S. Special Forces go in order to seize the servers. Special Forces versus CIA. There's a reason that JFK reportedly, famously said that he wanted to break the CIA into 1,000 pieces and throw it to the wind. I think there's a prime time opportunity for President Trump to do so. And then at the state levels, you had all of this malfeasance going on. You had in particular, of course, the now infamous Dominion voting technology, which we can now see was algorithmically programmed in order to switch votes in Biden's favor. And it should be noted, this should be public knowledge, and the fact that it isn't being broadcast far and wide just goes to show how effective another one of the deep state's assets, the mainstream media, is being. And the fact that Smartmatic, which works in partnership with the technology with Dominion, Smartmatic's chairman is Lord Malik Brown of England. And who is he? A longtime associate of none other than George Soros. Actually, not only a month after the election took place, Malik Brown was appointed, became the new president of Soros Open Society Foundations. So it's a huge swamp, it's a huge mess of interwoven interests and corrupt practices and corrupt politicians and individuals and globalists. And it's absolutely imperative that the people become informed about it. Any person who takes a close look at it realizes that it was a steal. And the only reason, sadly, again, that so many people still remain blind to all of this is because of the immense influence and machinations of the mainstream media.
Why is there not more outrage when you've got these tech companies who are censoring a sitting president, who are literally not just putting their thumb on the scale, they are leaning their entire substantial body on the election scale here to throw an election? They told us before the election that they had the ability to move 6, 8, 10 million votes away from Trump and towards Biden. Why do we never take those things seriously? Why is it that for many Americans, even many Americans on the right, it's all, unless you can find a big bucket with 1 million ballots in it, no one's going to take seriously the claims of voter fraud. And when you look at what you just said, you gave a nice analysis there of all the different factors, all the different prongs in which the election was undermined, where that the rules were changed, where people turned blind eyes. Even the investigation process so far has been a joke. I mean, there's been no transparency. There's been no, most of these votes should have been audited, not simply counted. It's not happened in most places. And we've got a Republican Party that almost has nothing to say about any of this, as they're evidently just waiting for Joe Biden to be coronated.
I just wrote this morning about Nevada, where you had actually a subpoena put out through which was obtained information from the state's DNB showing that thousands of non-citizens were registered to vote and ended up voting, casting ballots in the election, the 2020 election. So again, just at all levels. Again, the stops were being activated in order to thwart the election. Just imagine for a second the fact that they were using on so many levels, so many mechanisms to add more votes to Biden's column. Just think how great President Trump's victory actually was. And he himself has said it, that he won in a landslide. But it just goes to show the depth of the corruption that we're facing. But it's absolutely imperative that people continue to educate themselves and educating others. As we spoke earlier in our previous segment, there's still a path to victory for the president, a path to victory for America. But a lot of that rests also on the public remaining engaged in this. So if people become complacent and decide, you know what, we're just going to throw in a towel because we're tired of fighting, that's where we can lose. But if we continue fighting, we'll win this, whatever the result of the election, whoever gets into the White House in January, so long as the American people are committed to the truth and committed to preserving the integrity of this republic and of our electoral system, then we can live to fight another day and continue to take on the elites in another battle further down the road.
please check out thenewamerican.com and all JBS sources for information for the kind of work you're doing, Luis. We're really grateful for you. Thanks for keeping America informed, and have a nice Christmas.